Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my monthly reading wrap up for November 2020. November was a really good reading month, actually the joint best of 2020. In fact, I read 13 books in total by 11 different authors, comprising 3 different genres. And indeed, those 3 genres are science fiction, fantasy and horror. Anyway, obviously there's a lot of books to get through, so I'm not going to hang about with doing any more introduction now. The first book that I read was Masquerade in Lodi, written by Lois McMaster Bujold. I read this on my Kindle, so there will be a picture up on screen now. Masquerade in Lodi is one of many now. This is the 8th or 9th, I can't remember which now, novel set within the Penric and Desdemona novella universe. I have been enjoying this novella series since Bujold first released the first one almost 3 years ago now, and they are all extremely fun, brilliantly well written, set within a fantasy world. The basic idea of the overall universe is that Penric encounters a dying woman on the road. She is a magic user due to having a demon within her. The demon, upon the old woman's death, switches to Penric. The demon is called Desdemona, and Penric then becomes a magic user due to the demon's power, and Penric essentially becomes a healer because it may be a chaos demon that he has inside him, but it's not inherently evil as such. Some are, he's not. And essentially this is one of many stories which is essentially an adventure of Penric and Desdemona. I wouldn't say this is my favourite, this is not my least favourite, or actually, in fact, it's very hard to say that because frankly they are all almost completely even in quality. They are all brilliantly well written, great ideas and a fantastic fantasy world which I would greatly recommend. Starting with the first one though, this one might be a bit strange if you started with it, frankly. The second book that I read in November was Adrift on the Sea of Rhines, written by Iain. This is a very short novella, the first of a quartet called the Apollo Quartet. I do want to read the next 3 now, and essentially this is a mission to the lunar surface, so the moon, and essentially when there is a mission to the lunar surface and there's a little colony there with a very small number of obviously astronauts, a nuclear war breaks out on Earth and essentially human civilization wipes itself out, and well, at least they think they might have, they're not sure because they can't contact Earth, and it's a case of what do these small group of people that are stuck on the moon do now. They do have a plan and I'm curious to see where this plan goes. It was well written, very brief, and honestly, if you can buy this quite cheaply, it would be more worth it because it is very short for the length and the price you buy it for. So I recommend buying this for as cheaply as you can because the length really does make you want to do that. The third thing that I read in November was The October Country by Ray Bradbury. Now, you know that I've read Ray Bradbury in the past, if you've watched my previous videos, and I've loved everything that I've read by Ray Bradbury before. This is not an exception to that. This was fantastic. This is a sort of spooky, creepy horror short story collection. I'm not going to talk about any of the short stories in particular. Suffice to say that they're all creepy and weird with amazing ideas behind them. They're all very different from each other. They've got very different themes and very different, almost different way of writing, frankly, than each other, which is frankly a remarkable achievement for Ray Bradbury. The writing is super strong, obviously, as you can tell from how enthusiastic I'm about this book, and I greatly enjoyed this. I really did. It was amazingly well written. The stories had fantastic ideas. Ray Bradbury is known for his ideas, and frankly, I would heavily recommend this. I mean, if you want to start with Ray Bradbury, this is a good place to start, although there are many, frankly, overall. The next novel that I read happened to be on my Kindle, so there'll be a picture on screen now, and that is The Lost Soul, written by Lailvaux. Now, this is a self-published novel. It is a really interesting and fun science fiction novel, which I greatly enjoyed and would greatly recommend. Now, at the start of this novel, it starts off with a mission and a colonisation of Mars, and that's that sort of colony base idea. When the newest person arrives, shortly afterwards, strange things start happening, and I was at first a little bit apprehensive because I thought, is this another sort of colony on another planet idea where there's going to be murders and strange happenings? I've read a few over the last so many years, and there's a sort of formula to them, frankly. I'm going to have to say, this does not follow that formula. This has some fresh ideas, interesting writing, strong writing. There's some interesting twists and turns and unexpected events, and the characters in this really fit into the world and work well together. I greatly enjoyed this novel and I would very much recommend it. The next thing that I read was actually a trilogy, and that is, yes, another trilogy by Raymond E. Feist. These are Wrath of a Mad God, Into a Dark Realm, and finally Flight of the Nighthawks. Now, this is the third from last set of books set within Raymond E. Feist's Greater Rift War universe, of which there are 30 books in total. As there's only 2 books left in this series, there's frankly no point me now talking about the plot of these at all, because if you are invested in this series, which obviously I am at this point, then you will want to read these. If you are not invested in the series, then you're not going to want to read these because they will make no sense by themselves. You will basically be reading from the start of the series onwards, which I have now done. So I'm not going to really say anything else other than say I enjoyed them. They are really good, well-written fantasy novels. There are a few cliched ideas at this point by Feist in the book, I'm not going to deny, but overall they're still well-written and they're still fun, albeit a little bit predictable at times because he's written so many books within this universe that I think that might be hard to not do that. Sort of there are certain character stereotypes now that he's already done before, and that has started to reoccur. That's fine. I mean, the books are still fun, and the greater plot line that arcs over all the 30 books is still there, and it's still evolving and changing, and I'm curious to see where this will end up at the end. The next book that I read was Snow White and the Seven Samurai, written by Tom Holt. Now, if you do not know Tom Holt, he's an English author. When he writes humour, which this is, his humour is frankly a bit mad and frantic, and personally works for me on the whole, not always but mostly. And this is one that I actually really enjoyed. It is mad and frantic, as I've said, and this follows his usual style. Essentially, the operating system behind the Magic Mirrors network within Fairyland breaks down, it crashes. So all the fairy tales get mixed up. So instead of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you obviously have Snow White and the Seven Samurai. Oh, by the way, you know the Seven Samurai? Yeah, that's from the whole idea behind what spawned the Magnificent Seven. So, yes, you've got little Snow White, who's not quite what you think as well, being basically helped and ordering around a load of samurai wearing armour and carrying giant swords. As you do, you've got other strange characters as well. You've got the 3 little pigs are getting fed up by the big bad wolf keep blowing their house down. So they are now building houses with mortars and razor wire and minefields to try and stop the wolf, because they're frankly getting a bit fed up because the insurance on the houses are starting to increase a bit, and keep getting the houses blown up. So they're trying to stop the big bad wolf. There are other characters as well, and they're all mad, frantic. It's strange as hell, this book is, frankly, but I did enjoy it because, and although the plot doesn't really make a lot of sense until the end, where the plot doesn't make sense even then, because it's a very strange plot line and very bizarre. So you need to have a certain outlook when you go into it. Frankly. The next book that I read was City, written by Clifford D. Simak, and yes, this is one of the Yellow Spine SF Masterworks. Now, this never originally started off as a full-length novel. This was actually a series of short stories which were independently published, which then Simak realised could be turned into a novel. Essentially, he wrote a connecting framework for them and published City. This is a far future Earth. Mankind has risen technologically to a really high level, and this is a series of sort of tales of how humanity has evolved and reached this point, and what the cost of this advancement is. It's a well written novel, although you can obviously tell that this wasn't intended as a full length novel, because the connections between the different sections are blatant, frankly. I mean, he's tried to connect them as smoothly as he can, but you can't hide them. This was a series of short stories connected. You can tell that from the very start. And it works fine for what it is. It's not my favourite novel that I've read recently, but it has some interesting ideas. It's well written. It's got some strong writing in it, as many of the novels that I've read this month did have. And overall, I would recommend it. It's a good novel by Simak, and it's one that I'm very happy to read, because this is a very well-known one by a well-known sort of author within science fiction, the golden age of science fiction, and I'm very glad that I've read this particular novel. The next novel that I read is another SF Masterworks. I'm on a bit of a binge at this point in the month, and that is The Gate to Women's Country, written by Sheri S. Tepper. This is the first Sheri S. Tepper book that I have read to date, and there's been about 9 at this point, or 10, that I have not fully read, with a friend of mine, Rachel, known as Coloniander on BookTube. The reason that I didn't fully read this one with Rachel is because she read this one before we started our sort of buddy reading series of reading Sheri S. Tepper books. And I thought, well, at some point I need to read this, so I've read just as many Tepper books as Rachel, and then when we talk about Tepper, our conversations should hopefully be more interesting due to the fact that we've read exactly the same Sheri S. Tepper books. The idea behind this one, you might have guessed by the title, this is a country ruled by women. The men are relegated to sort of male only little encampments, where they are very much encouraged to be very sort of horribly stereotypical sort of males, all military training and all regimented and things, and a bit over abundance of testosterone, frankly. And the women are doing all these sort of art pursuits in these cities. To be honest, at the start I was very unsure whether I was going to enjoy this or whether I was even going to be able to finish this, to be honest, because that contrast between the women in the city doing all these sort of female things, these sort of stereotypical things, and the males being very much stereotypes there. I was like, how is this going to work? It is dark and very quite nasty at some points. There are some very unpleasant events that happen. It does work out at the very end of the novel, but it does take the entire novel for it to work out. And frankly, until that point, I really struggled with this novel. It took me 2 days to read this, nearly 3 in fact, and considering it's not that long, that's quite an achievement, because of the darkness in it and the events in it. It made me question whether I wanted to finish it, but you do find out why. I just wish the reveal and the reason behind all the events was a little bit earlier, because it would make it easier to enjoy. Because frankly, it's so dark, it's a bit depressing, frankly, to read until that point, and then it's like, oh, that's why all these events have happened, and then you can think back and actually enjoy it. I mean, at some future point I will reread this, and I will probably enjoy it all the way through, because I will then know what the point of the novel is. It's one of those kind of novels, it's actually better on a reread, frankly, than anything else. The next novel that I read, you may be familiar with because I did a separate review of it last week, and that is the Hydrogen Sonata, written by Iain M. Banks. Now, I've done a separate review of this. I've just said there's no point me talking about this in depth now because frankly I'll just be completely repeating myself. Suffice to say, this is the 10th and final culture novel that Iain M. Banks wrote before his death in 2012, was it, or 2013. This is a strong culture novel, interesting idea, strong writing, an interesting plot line with an interesting amount of subjects which work really well. And if you want to know more, basically just go and watch my review. I'll talk about it far more in depth there. Suffice to say, I greatly enjoyed this, and this was a good ending, I thought, to my year of reading all 10 culture novels by Banks. Overall, I've greatly enjoyed Banks' culture novels, and I will, in 2021, start reading other books by Iain M. Banks, and I do actually already have a few by him already, so it won't take me long to start reading those. The next book that I read is another masterwork, yes, once again, and this is The Way the World Ends by James Morrow. Now, this is a bit of a contrast to some of these novels that I read just beforehand, because this is about obviously the end of the world, and this is a very grim novel and a dark novel that I, frankly, I'm not really sure whether I enjoyed it. To be honest, I probably didn't. To be honest, it had its moments. The idea of it is there is a tombstone engraver called George Paxman. He's offered a bargain at the start of the novel by a salesman who says basically, if you sign a document saying that if nuclear war starts, then you are to blame, and in return you get essentially a nuclear proof suit, a kind of hazmat type suit, although there's obviously a salesman talking, so this is not necessarily to be trusted. And he does, and guess what? The next day, World War III breaks out, and the nuclear missiles flying everywhere. Things don't go well for George after that point, let's say. The novel goes in a strange direction. It's quite grim, very strange. A lot of it seemed unnecessary, and I didn't understand exactly what he was trying to prove with his writing. I understand what he hoped to achieve with the novel. It's actually an anti-war novel, and obviously to do with the Cold War, written obviously at that time, and the idea of basically war is pointless because nobody's going to win by it, and the whole idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction, where basically if I have nukes and you have nukes and I fire my nuclear missiles at you, you will obviously fire them back, and we all die in horrible, slow, agonising death. So it's talking about that, and it's an interesting idea and a concept. It didn't work out well for me, frankly, because it was so grim and so unpleasant that sadly this is not one that I probably will be rereading in a hurry. Maybe at a future point I might reread it, but it'll be a long time. I think I'll need to be in the right frame of mind, frankly, for this. And finally, the last novel that I read in November was Pavane, written by Keith Roberts. I've actually been wanting to read something by Keith Roberts for a while because he writes a lot of the forewords to many of the other SF Masterworks novels. And finally, I've actually read something by him himself, rather than just a foreword section. And sad to say, I did not enjoy this novel at all. This was actually my least favourite novel of this month, and honestly, one of my least favourite novels of 2020 so far, which is quite an achievement, frankly. This was strange. I didn't understand the point of it, and I didn't enjoy it, frankly. The idea of it is that Queen Elizabeth I gets assassinated. It is obviously alternative history, and this changes obviously a whole different alternative timeline where Britain is not the superpower it then becomes, and obviously what it is today. Instead, it's ruled by the Roman Catholic Church, and the whole way of society is completely different. And this is about a revolution against this Roman Catholic rule, and it's split into a series of I think it's 7 different sort of longer chapters, each one focused on a different point of view character. Start with they don't appear as though they are connected, but, and this is one thing the book does do well, they do become connected as the book goes on in a very strange way, but a way that works really well, and that does work well, and I did enjoy that aspect. The connections between them build up in a very clever manner, and frankly, actually I'll say it probably is worth it for that, because unlike something like City where the connections are a bit broken and you can tell that they're being forced together, with this they appear strange at first, but actually the connections are very strong as you go on. And by the end I was actually really impressed by the way he connected all these what appeared to be disparate characters into this larger narrative about rebellion against a unpleasant government system. And I don't know, actually I would say that I sort of both would and wouldn't recommend this novel. I'd recommend it for that connection and the structure of it, not for the actual plot line. It's a strange novel to talk about, but I am glad I read it though, even though, like I said, it's not one of my favourite novels at all, but I'm still glad. Anyway, with that said, that's actually it for everything that I read in the course of November, which I can barely hold up. If you've read any of these, or you would like to, then please leave me a comment and we can have a talk about it. If you have any book suggestions for me based on any of these that you think I might like, again leave a comment. All my social media links, as well as links to anybody I mentioned and the review and that sort of thing, can be found in the description box below. With that said, that is it for this video, so thank you for watching and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.